this is a fairly long talk that we're going to compress into hyperspeed, so we might skip over some things a little bit or gloss over. We'll be around after the talk to take questions or follow-up conversations as you see fit. So just a little bit about the Eclipse Foundation. A lot of people, when they hear Eclipse, they either think about the recent solar phenomenon. I literally have an Eclipse jacket, and people are like, did you get that from the solar eclipse? I'm like, no. But the Eclipse Foundation, which grew out of the IDE work and the governance around the IDE work, has become a really large, and in fact, one of the most disciplined and structured foundations for open source management there is, with now over 400 projects spread across 20 different working groups. Some of the things, obviously, the IDE, but other things you might not have realized were part of this. There's a project called Adoptium, which does the Temurin builds for the OpenJDK. It's the most secure version of the OpenJDK you can get. Software-defined vehicle, in which many manufacturers who are building the foundations and platforms for automation in cars and software stacks in cars, because your car is running Linux, and that should either make you feel really good or really bad, depending upon how much you know about the state of open source, and things like Jakarta EE. One of the things I find the most interesting about the Eclipse Foundation is that all the committers are known. There's a committer agreement. It's not a strong validation. You're going to do an ID check the way your bank might do, but there is, who are you, what is your name, what organization do you work for? And in light of recent events, that is particularly interesting, and a direction we sort of going to look at. So moving forward here, how we got here, right, is sort of like all of us, we've all as an industry seen the rise of software supply chain as a risk and factors that are sort of always there suddenly becoming more prevalent. At the Eclipse Foundation, the processes that we had and the number of projects we were dealing with were manageable-ish, but over 20 years of growth and this increased awareness of the risk, because the risk was always really there. But more importantly, attackers were taking advantages, because this was now a lower hanging fruit than some of the other attacks available. This has sort of created a bit of a situation where everything was creaking at the seams. And so, examples of this, and Marta is really the source of all these horror stories that I like to talk about now, but vulnerabilities would just get notified and fall, nobody knew. Sort of left hand, right hand, huge gaps between them. My favorite is that anybody who had access to pretty much anything at the Eclipse Foundation as a committer had access to the full set of all the vulnerabilities total. So what could possibly go wrong with that? Because as much as we know everyone there, we don't really know everyone there. And of course, with that many projects growing, of course, we had a consistent and well-applied methodology for vulnerability handling across. No, it was mayhem. Everybody did their own way, how they did it, what they did. And we were often expecting people who were not experts in security, had never thought about this stuff before, to handle a process that was evolving, changing, and not up to snuff. So as you might expect, we had reason to be worried. I think this is truly my favorite, right? It's like, this is sort of a sign of the cultural changes that are part of the problem as well. And at the end of the day, a lot of these things we talk about, there are technical issues, but it's really a human problem, right? And just understanding how the humans think about it and how they were responding, what they thought of as a vulnerability, right? And there's another aspect here, like even they just didn't want to call it a vulnerability, it's just a bug, and we'll move on. And so a lot of sort of cultural changes were part of the challenge we were facing here as well. So into this void, we had no dedicated security team. Security was all over the place. The Eclipse board was seeing the writing on the wall and across a broad range of things, Eclipse leadership, and decided we wanted to make Eclipse be a true leader in open source security and to solve hard problems at a scale that was, daunting and exciting. The Alpha Omega project liked what they saw and was interested in doing that there, and so brought in money to create the security team. And Marta here is one of the first hires into that team. She got into the team because she complained about something in security, and they said, fine, come here and work on it, which will teach you. Honestly, I've learned more about vulnerability management, certainly at the Eclipse scale, from Marta than all of you, everybody else I know together, just the things that she does. It's great. And so with that, I'm going to hand off to Marta. She's going to do the actually meaningful part of the talk, and I'll stand by and look pretty-ish.
We have set up those new processes, had good ideas about how things should work. And then came the first real test case. The issue was in XML parsing in the Eclipse IDE. Not something that is completely unexpected, so something that you would expect that's going to happen one day, And in fact, it turned out after investigation that similar issues have been reported before, but they were either fixed locally or they lacked complete investigation all around the code base. So in this case, in 2023, developers actually had a look at the whole code base of Eclipse ID. And Eclipse ID, it's not one project. There are dozens of projects. They are really seen together. They have different version schemes. They have different teams of developers. And what we have found out is that the same code, the same pattern code, was copied into multiple different plugins. So we had the same issue, basically the same issue in different places. And what is also important to know, those projects have a simultaneous release. So we had to get a fix in all those plugins at the same time to get into the release train that is strict 3 months. In the middle of that, many developers were using the confidential issues for the first time in their life. So they were posting the issue link to other developers who couldn't access it because they didn't have the permission. At the end, we have 22 people having access to the issue. We were teaching them how to synchronize. How do we write a CVE entry at the same time? And well, there were some other issues that I haven't been thinking at the beginning. We figured out in practice that the CI wasn't prepared to do a run for a confidential issue. So we had to bring the IT people to the issue so that they manually spawn the CI. Since then, they have prepared the processes to handle this. So this is a solved problem. And one additional thing that has been haunting me till last month, different plugins, different elements of the Eclipse ID that had the vulnerability, they have different versioning schemes. So we wrote the CVE entry with the main version of the Eclipse ID that is affected, adding some of the versions of the plugins, and we posted it like that. Imagine what happened in the different vulnerability scanners. They were applying wrong version numbers to the wrong module. So, and of course, this is very automatic. This process is completely automatic, of course. So we had to have exchanges back and forth with different places to fix all those versioning problems so that people get the correct vulnerability reports. So apparently, this is fixed right now.
We think so.
We think so. So out of this experience and many other experiences, we have a long-term vision where we want to go. There are 3 main elements. We have our vision for security researchers, for maintainers, and for users of our software. We may criticize the CVE program that people are asking for CVEs to put that in their CVs, but well, that is how it works.
We are definitely criticizing that. We're not.
But if this is the way that makes them report vulnerabilities to open source projects, so be it. We are going to give them credits in the CVE entries. It means that we need to trace who reported what. We need to communicate with researchers to make the experience for them as pleasant, as professional as possible. Then for maintainers, we at Eclipse have big projects with good established processes, with dozens of developers working on the project, and we have all those small projects that are receiving vulnerabilities once every 3 years. So we support projects that already have good processes, but we also provide assistance to smaller projects. For example, helping them writing the CV entry, guiding them on how to do the reporting, how to do the communication with the researcher. This is not one size fits all. It is designed to work in a way that gives the right experience to different maintainers in their project. And finally, users, because this is the most important group in there. They want readable CV entries, and they want information what is affected and how they are going to update things like VEX entries. But the change is not that easy as you would like it to have. And as Micah says, it's a human problem. So we have brought expertise in the terms of the security team, but just having the expertise, it's not enough. Developers need to trust you. So that took time, discussing with developers, getting the karma points one by one, so that at some point they come to you from their own initiative to ask about something, about the problem that they have, the suggestion about handling a vulnerability. There's also patience, because when we need to explain the same thing for the 5th, 10th, or 100th time, that could be difficult, but still necessary.
I think also it takes calendar time, right? Like the human processes just take time to work through, and you have to
Exactly.
You need to measure things in months, not weeks.
And this is a change. There's a work to make sure that we adjust the process when we are seeing different things. And a funny story, not long ago, a lead from one of the projects came to me. We had a discussion about some vulnerability. They were overriding the process before because they didn't like how it worked. And even after all of my communication, presentations at conferences, newsletters, blog posts, they didn't know about the new process. So what we did, they are going to try the new process at the next vulnerability. So the life cycle is pretty standard that we have. We have the mailing list, we have confidential issues, and then we get through the whole of it. We are multiple things as a work in progress and constant adjustment of the part of the process that we have already made working. And we'll let Michael finish.
Thank you. So there's a lot of stuff that we haven't finished doing yet, right? Tooling issues between what GitLab does and what GitHub does. We use both systems for source management. Even just thinking about, can we get to the point where we have some sense of like an SLO for how long it takes a vulnerability to work its way through various triage processes and be able to communicate that clearly, either on a per project basis or globally, so that we know what expectations are for everybody. And we can also track when something is not working the way it should, so we can escalate or intervene. We need to do regular training, right? Training is a big part of anything like that. Onboarding process for new projects, for new people, and then just all these like advanced, nuanced little things that we haven't figured out yet that are part of the journey. I think to sort of bring this to a close, right? One of my favorite sort of Googleisms is thriving in ambiguity. They talk about it for employees at Google, but it really is a great sort of mantra for what we're doing here too, which is there's a lot of stuff that we'd love to have a clear, perfect answer. We'd love for our teams to have clear, perfect answers. And we just have to kind of work our way through gently with patience and kindness every step of the way. But we're still very clear. Our goal is to normalize vulnerability management. And by normalize, I don't just mean have a standard process. We want it to become a normal part of operations. You know, I alluded to earlier on, one of the projects, they didn't want to have things declared as vulnerabilities. They'd rather declare it as a bug and fix the issue because they felt like a vulnerability was somehow sort of a badge of shame or something really awful, right? Vulnerabilities are inevitable. And so we partner with the IT organization. The more we can have centralized processes for build and issue tracking and confidential issues, the more secure they are, the easier they're to normalize across the base. So we are keen to start a more broad conversation within the Eclipse Foundation. And so if you're interested in joining an online discussion, and we're hoping to eventually get to some sort of quarterly roundtable meeting as well, we find these processes to be valuable. And so we'd love for people of all ilk to come and join us in the conversation and learn what we're doing and contribute to what they think we should be doing differently. That's very much part of our conversation. I have more QR codes coming. So this is our committer handbook. And it is where we document our standard practices and policies. And committers are routinely pointed to that. And there's an entire section around security. And we're actually contemplating creating a security handbook that's another level of detail as well, because it's just too much to pack into one book. But the high level has to be clear in that handbook. I want to do a little call out. We did a case study. You know, we talked about some of the projects that are doing well. The Tamarin project is doing a great job. They've got good practices. They have reproducible builds. They've hit SALSA level 3 and 4 in various places. And there's a case study. It's not actually available today, but that link might work anyway. But tomorrow it'll be out and published on All the Glory. And so with that, I think we're cruising into our time limit here. Thank you very much. We will take questions until somebody tries to kick us out. And Joe got, everybody's here named Joe, so we'll get into the starting. Joe had a couple of quick questions. Okay, we'll talk about it. Well, the identity one is an interesting one, and it's a long-standing culture within the Eclipse organization. So it's not something we had to introduce later on. I think the idea of bringing that into an existing community is almost certainly complicated. Yeah, know your contributor. But there's obviously reasons why this is something worth doing. I would find an opt-in model here would be a very interesting path to join it down. So I'll cover your other questions, Joe, offline, I think. Yes?
You mentioned SLO.
Yep.
What is that?
Service level objective. So if we think about, like, how quickly can we respond when a vulnerability is reported by a researcher, to give them a heads up saying, we have received it, we will get back to you within 24 hours to say that we have either accepted it for continued triage or have rejected it as a dupe or whatever we're going to do. That's a very minimal level, but then also within our process, how quickly can we go from that initial evaluation and triage by the security team to then a handoff down to the actual project owners and have them pick it up? And you know, you could get more nuanced if you want, but just understanding how well we're handling those processes across the space. In the back.
In the back.
You're both named Joe, so it'll work anyway.
How do you handle security vulnerabilities which were reported as bugs, maybe because the reporter simply didn't know about the impact of that?
I will repeat the question.
Yeah, please go. That's a long question.
So how do we handle security issues that got reported as bugs? So we try to remove them from the public issue trackers and put them into the confidential ones. Or if there's already some discussion, use off channels to stop the discussion, bring developers to the confidential issue, and then push the fix when the fix is ready. Just close it with, this has been fixed by this commit. And then the release goes out with the correct information. It depends on the case.
It's not as funny as it sounds from the laughter behind the wall here. One more question. I see lots of people waving us saying they're saying stop. So we'll take questions outdoor now.
As you mentioned, small projects running into CVEs every other year at most. Have you something in your training program like a sandbox for these maintainers?
Yeah, the last question, do we have a sandbox to train? Yeah, we have done, we have a training and we have project with examples on how to handle vulnerability. And it's a public project. I can share the link if you are interested to reuse it.
All right. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming today.